Good evening and welcome to NAMI New Jersey Summage's Bicultural Identities Cultivation presentation. My name is Lavanya, and I'm the Peer Engagement Specialist for Summage. So today we're honored to have our two distinguished presenters, Tanya Lalwani and Timothy Wilkerson, for joining us today. So a little bit about both of them. Tanya Lalwani is a clinical psychology doctoral student at Rutgers University. After graduating from Columbia University, she worked as the Helpline Manager at NAMI-NYC. At Rutgers Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, she has focused on providing culturally relevant psychotherapy to individuals and families, as well as on conducting community-based advocacy and crisis counseling for immigrants and refugees through the FEMA GSAPP Hope and Healing program. Mr. Timothy Wilkerson is a second-year doctoral student of clinical psychology at GSAPP. He currently externs in a community clinic specializing in health psychology, as well as outpatient clinic seeing first responders to 9/11 attacks. He also provides individual psychotherapy to a diverse clientele, along with community-based crisis counseling through FEMA GSAPP Hope and Healing. So I'd like now to pass this on to Tanya and Tim. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the introduction. We're so excited and happy to be here and kind of share this topic and have some great discussion tonight. So in terms of what we're going to kind of cover today, we just wanted to share our outline with you. We're going to do a brief introduction activity so that we can all kind of get more comfortable with each other, get to know each other, and then kind of cover some key topics and have a little bit of discussion on this subject. And then we're going to share some skills because we like to always do some skill building and then kind of close off with a closing meditation.
Yeah, so we really are going to, target some really important topics that we think would really benefit everyone. But, as we continue to go through this presentation, if, any topics come up for any of you all that you would like for us to talk about or discuss, throughout this presentation, do feel free to, unmute yourselves and jump in and share with us. We, really aim for this to be a really integrative and interactive workshop and discussion. So we'd love to hear from everyone about how they're feeling. We do have, a few pieces of reflections that we'd, like to do together to really hear how everyone is kind of taking in this information, processing it, and feeling. So yeah, just, as we continue to go, do feel free to unmute yourselves and kind of share and interact with us as we go. So now as you've heard some about us, we'd love to hear more about everyone here. So we are going to do this thing called the name game, which is kind of a bit of an icebreaker. But as we're talking about bicultural identity, we also think it's really important to kind of start with what our names mean, as this is really such a huge important part of our culture, and this is something that we carry with us day in and day out, and this is how other people know us, and this is how our parents have kind of passed down our culture and what that means just for us. So we think starting off with what our names mean to each other, and maybe why it's a significant part about us that we like to hold very near and dear to us. We kind of like to go around and share what that is for everyone. So feel free to share as much or as little as you'd like. I can go first, and Tanya can go, and then we'll kind of go from there. So my name is Timothy Wilkerson, actually Timothy Antonio Wilkerson II. And this name means so much to me because I'm named after my dad. And I always joke with them, like technically I should be Junior instead of the second, but they just didn't want me to be called TJ. But my name is really important to me just because it kind of represents just the passing down of the lineage. For my dad, it was really important growing up in a single parent household just between him and his mom. So the name that she gave him, the name that I then, was given, being, his first son, is just, it's really means a lot to me, means a lot in just in terms of our family. It's something that I intend to pass down, and hopefully it kind of continues from there. So for me, that's my name and a bit of why it's special to me. And I will pass it to Tanya.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing. So my name is Tanya Lalwani. So in Hindi, it's pronounced Tanya, which is what my parents would call me and what they kind of officially named me. And I definitely think there's a little bit of assimilation when I say, oh, my name is Tanya now. But my name is really important to me because my dad named me, and I'm South Asian as well. And I was actually born in India. And so when I was born, my parents told me this later, but there was like a Janam Patri, which is essentially kind of like a horoscope for those who may not be aware. And so there's always like certain letters that are kind of more auspicious or better for you to name your child based on those letters. And so my dad was kind of adamant that he just wanted to name me Tanya because he's always loved that name, and he read it in a book once. And so he had this dream to kind of name his daughter that. And so we never kind of got the Janam Patri like kind of open, like they did it, but they never looked at it. And then my mom retroactively looked at it, and actually the letter was T. So it was just like a perfect coincidence. And so it's both kind of this really meaningful thing that connects me to my dad and was, I guess auspicious in some way. So I always think it's such a cool coincidence. But yeah. So if anybody else would feel comfortable sharing a short story, anything, as little as much as you want, feel free to unmute. We'd love to hear it.
Well, I'm going to go next. My full name is Subhashini, and my dad named my name too. And Subhashini means soft-spoken, or the person who speaks good. So that's the meaning. And I'm actually a voice. I'm a parent advocate for my son and others who is in the same boat as my son and us. That's about me. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Would anyone like to go?
I can go next. Yeah, this is Sureka. So in my family, all my siblings' names starts with Su. So my sister and my brother and my older brother, my older sister and myself and my younger one. So that's how I got this name, Sureka. And Su means like good, as Subha said. And it's special to me.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
I can go next. My name is Rupal Dalal. And my story is a little different. I actually always hated my name growing up. Obviously, I moved here when I was a year old from India. And so at the time, there weren't that many Indians. And so my name was a little bit weird. And I always thought, oh, when I'm 18, I'll change it, or I'll at least change the spelling, because I always get mixed up. People are always like, oh, he, like they would always think it's a male name, probably because of the spelling. So I figured, when I turn 18, I'll change the spelling, at least, if not my name. And I think it's just one of those things that even whether you like your name or you don't, it's so much a part of who you are. Like I just never could go through with it. Forget about changing the name. I couldn't even go through with changing the spelling of it. And now that we all do our gender identities, it makes life so much easier because I could just say she, her, but it's inherently just a part of who I am, even though I don't particularly love the name itself.
Hi, okay, I'll go next. My name means smile, and that's special to me because that defines a huge part of my personality, I think.
Thank you so
Anyone?
much for everyone who's shared so far. Yeah, anyone else would like to share before we move on?
I can go if you want.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have an interesting story. My name is Ron, and I don't have an interesting story about my name. I know that there was no other family members that I was named after. I'm the only Ron in the family. My full name is Ronald, but it makes me think hearing Tanya and Timothy talk about our names and what they mean. I wish I had asked my parents. My parents have since passed on, but I wish I had asked them like why they named me Ronald.
Yeah.
So it's making me look curious, but I really don't have a story for it.
Yeah, well, that's
That's
so
it.
great. So thank you so much for sharing.
Okay.
Well, I think
share. I'll share. So my name is Lavanya, which actually means grace, graceful in Sanskrit. And many times I hear my name being used to describe the divine feminine in Hinduism. It's one of the names, one of the ways to describe the Devi. And because my name is special to me also because my dad, he named me after one of his Bengali professors from medical school. And so even though I am from a sort of a Telugu / South Indian family, I've always had a deep love for Bengali culture. So it has like, I guess it's special to me in multiple ways.
Thank you so much, Lavanya, and everyone else who shared. I think this really kind of illustrated, and we love that it kind of set the tone of what we're kind of here to discuss and talk about of identity. And I think names, as Tim mentioned before as well, are such a kind of the first door even into that. And yeah, and I think it's such an important thing to kind of share with our loved ones and, to bring ourselves closer to our kind of identities. So thank you all. And if there was anyone who would like to kind of share that we didn't get to, in the interest of time, we'll move along, but please, please, please feel free to share in the chat and we'll definitely take a look at that, of course. Okay. So to kind of start, we're just going to cover some key topics and just even kind of understand what bicultural identity really even means. So biculturalism represents aspects of one's identity that are connected to both one's heritage culture, so South Asian culture, and the culture of the country or region that you're kind of settled in, so American culture. So I always like to think about it kind of like having one foot in two different boats and paddling along the river of life. So naturally, as you can imagine, as you're doing that, it can be a constant balancing act of kind of balancing these two very different cultures. And this can consist of values, traditions, religion, language, even basic things like food and clothing and music. And so there's a lot of different parts of it. And the kind of ethnic connection part of biculturalism oftentimes is not just a reaction to kind of the often traumatic experience of change and displacement of moving from one place to another, and a response to maybe experiencing discrimination, coming to the US and feeling different, feeling like, you're kind of the other. But it can also be a positive thing of a sense of pride in one's, heritage and a desire to hold on to it, and something that kind of connects you to your host or a heritage country. And so for a lot of people, this can also be kind of like a very active and intentional effort by parents to socialize their children towards their heritage culture and kind of be involved in cultural activities and arts. And this is definitely something that I experienced growing up. My parents were very, very, really prized me being involved in music and Indian classical music and dance. And so it was definitely kind of a way that they tried to, transmit this piece of heritage, this piece of culture down to me as well. So, oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. So we kind of covered what it is, and we also now want to see that linking piece between bicultural identity and how it can have an impact on our mental health and well-being. So as I kind of described that 2 feet into boat sort of image, you can imagine that this balancing act can have somewhat of a negative impact in some ways, particularly on individuals kind of really balancing these two things and struggling at times to do that. And so on the slide, you can see a couple of the different ways in which it can impact mental health and well-being. So there can be conflicting values and messages, different things that you hear at home and then different things at work or at school. Difficulties in relationships, and this might be dating, but also friendships, different expectations that, you know, you go to school or at work and people might demand things of you that may feel foreign, may feel new, or, you know, you might not be allowed to do if you're growing up and, you know, growing up in a certain type of household that doesn't necessarily, you know, understand or have those same values. There's also, of course, a lot of stigma toward in the culture toward gender identity and sexual orientation, and that's something that we'll kind of talk a little bit more later in the presentation. And of course, I think there's a lot of, you know, just kind of being different and being othered in American culture. From American culture can lead to discrimination and bullying, and not just for children, but for adults as well. So naturally, all of those things that I just listed can have really, you know, difficult and damaging kind of impact on one's mental health. And this can look like depression, anxiety, and a host of other mental health challenges. So taking a bit more of a closer look on the concept of acculturation, this basically is defined as a struggle that I kind of described just now that immigrants experience as a result of arriving in a new host society while still trying to adjust with their own native culture and, you know, what they've learned, what they've grown up with, or, you know, what they've been raised as. So there's 4 different acculturation strategies. So a lot of the times we mostly just hear of acculturation or we just hear assimilation, right? We don't necessarily hear all these other terms. So I'm going to go into them in a little bit more detail. So assimilation is basically when an individual fully accepts the new culture and rejects their heritage culture. So if I were to just kind of really adopt American culture and reject South Asian culture. Separation is the opposite. So this is when you retain your heritage culture and reject the new culture altogether. And then marginalization is when individuals reject both heritage and the new culture. So as you can imagine, this one can create a lot of diffusion of identity. You feel like you don't fit in anywhere. And in Hindi, there's the saying for those who might speak Hindi, neither ke na udhar ke. So it's like neither here nor there, where you don't feel like you really fit in anywhere. And this can really kind of, as I said, have that linking impact on one's mental health and well-being. And then the last one is integration, where individuals select aspects of both heritage culture and the new culture. So really kind of picking and choosing parts of the self that are of meaning and of value to oneself and integrating that into one's identity.
So we want to take a brief pause right here, since we've talked about the various different bicultural identities and how they can impact how we experience our culture, how we experience ourselves as being, kind of put into or operating within these 2 different cultures. So I want to take a moment here and just, have any reflections from, any of you all, if you've, noticed any of these concepts that as we've described them, come up in your life, or have any similar experiences to what Tanya's described, or maybe what you see as some of the opportunities or obstacles that arrive from kind of a result of biculturalism. So if anyone has any reflections or thoughts or anything they'd like to share.
Okay, I can go, I guess. So as far as assimilation and all of that, so I grew up in New Jersey, and I went to Catholic school, actually, and I was like the only brown kid in Catholic school, the only non-Christian. There were like 2 other kids that were I think, Episcopalian or something else. So I think growing up, I was very, very much interested in trying to just assimilate and be part of the crowd and be, and that was really difficult because my parents were immigrants. So they wanted to kind of, at home, we were keeping all of the typical traditional South Asian values and traditions and all of that. And even religiously, it was a little bit confusing because there were a lot of conflicts in terms of what I was learning in school and what I was being taught at home from a religious standpoint. So that was, when I was much younger, that was more of, trying to assimilate. But I think that as I've gotten a lot older, and I've met a lot more first generation South Asians, I think that it's been pretty amazing to kind of find other people who are like me, whose parents have come here, who kind of straddle both cultures, and then to be able to kind of pick and choose the things that I really enjoy about the South Asian culture and incorporate that. And I remember thinking, when I was in high school, I'm like, my generation is probably one of the only ones that will have that full advantage of both cultures. Whereas my kids now, who are teenagers, even though I'm married to somebody South Asian, they're a lot more Americanized and they don't have that same level of, having both, like they know they're Indian, but, I don't know that they feel it all the time. And I don't know that they have that connection to their heritage as much as I do. So I don't know, that was a long-winded explanation, I guess, but.
Yeah, no, but thank you so much. And you bring up a lot of really great points. I mean, there's, consistently so many, opposing pressures, perhaps, let's say, that kind of come with having a bicultural identity, especially being first generation. I mean, you do have the pressures of maintaining, a connection to your culture and to your heritage, especially if that is, everything that is your home life, of whether that's your language or your culture or food and everything that comes with, having that on the one hand at home, but at the same time, as you go out into, your own social world when it comes to school, peers and friends, class, whatever the case may be, that side and that pressure can be more, a more of an American culture that pushes on you to, like you said, assimilate and find where you fit in, and perhaps stressors of like, I don't necessarily fully fit in here or fit in there. So it really brings up quite a delicate balance, and in times a lot of stress is how we kind of balance both of these. They mean so much to us. And I really liked what you brought up about the importance of finding a social supportive network, people who also share some of the same struggles or same paths that you've had to take on, and how you can be there for each other and be supportive and learn and grow from each other's experiences. I mean, that means so much. But no, thank you so much for sharing.
Anybody else would like to share?
As a parent, we are immigrants,
Mhm.
and my kids are born here. I could relate to how Rupal felt. I feel like my kids sometimes feel it's always I wouldn't call it as a struggle, but we used to go every couple of years at least to India. We are from South India, and at home also we cook, at least few days South Indian food, and we, Hindu religion, and we pray certain gods, and they go to public school, and we grew up in a predominantly white community, not much diversity. So where it's predominantly different culture, so it causes, I can imagine how my kids would have felt when they were growing up. And I'm not saying that's the only driver that could have played a role in terms of stressors for my elder son's mental health related challenges that we are dealing with. I'm not saying that's only cause, but there are a lot of challenges, especially for the first generation kids who are born here. It's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and you also bring up really great points, especially when it comes to how we parent from a bicultural standpoint or point of view or experience that, taking into account what our kids might be experiencing and going through, being perhaps a lot more Americanized in their experiences, especially if, you do find yourself living in areas that are more predominantly white or have just a lack of general diversity, a lack of acceptance for various different cultures or cultural experiences. It can be very alienating for the whole entire family.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So for the kids, that can be a lot of stress for them. And, as parents, how do we approach our kids wanting to better understand and help them navigate these struggles, but, for as much wanting them to leaning into their culture, but also understanding like the world that they might be navigating and socially might not be as culturally understanding or accepting of their culture.
It's all very important critical aspects to consider while having family planning and having kids and what kind of environment they should grow up. If I knew how much I know now, I probably might not even have come to US, given the consequences of some of the prices we are paying.
Yeah. And that's, again, you touch on such great points. The really unfortunate aspects that having a bicultural identity carries. And, we'll definitely touch on this in a later aspect of our workshop, but of the racism and stereotypes and phobia that comes with living in a predominantly white, less diverse, less accepting society. And, biculturalism, that's unfortunately a really difficult part of that. Is there is a lot of racism, a lot of hatred, a lot of discrimination that comes with that. And how do we balance that? Especially when there are instances throughout the world that add increasing fuel to that fire. It's always present, but especially in those moments where things happen that accelerate that and make it happen at such a more pronounced rate, those things really, really come into more of our purview and can impact how we feel about, being in the States in general. And just, is it worth it? Is it worth it for our family? Is it worth it for what we're experiencing as a family, what my kids are experiencing? So, yeah,
It's a great country. There are a lot of good people from various culture, whites, blacks, Asians, what have you. But how the kids are when they're young and growing up, they latch on to only the negative aspects. They don't have the maturity yet to think, hey, this is only minority. There are majority of the people who embrace diversity. So I should not, damage my self-esteem. But they are young. They are not mature to think along those lines.
Yeah.
That's so true. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
Does anybody else want to go? We can move along. Maybe we can take one more person. They'd be interested.
To be honest, I didn't understand that why we are having this presentation. Now I understand this is so important to individual self-esteem and mental health. The topic we are discussing. I'm able to connect the dots now.
Yeah, thank you so much. We do really appreciate that. We hope that there's pieces of this that everyone can find some value in taking away. I think oftentimes there's so much that's going on in our worlds that we have to keep up with on a day-to-day basis when that comes to family, our jobs, everything that, these instances that we experience on perhaps such a regular level, we don't necessarily have the time or opportunities to explore them or to express them, especially with people who understand, people who can be supportive in those environments. And, all of these things that we do talk about really do have, such a great impact on our mental health, on self-esteem, on just the way we relate to others in our social environments. So, really being able to find a time to reflect on these things and to process them, to put names to some of the things that we're experiencing, really goes such a long way.
Yeah, I wish things like that are taught in schools, like starting from grammar school.
Yeah.
We would. We wish we could do this in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Should we move along, Tim? Or
Yeah. Let's do that. So kind of as we're talking so far, we've had so many great points being brought up. So again, really appreciate everyone who has shared. And if there are things that come up along the way that you would like for us to talk about, or perhaps spend some time reflecting on, please do unmute yourselves as you find things come up. But a lot of things that we've kind of talked about as far as our experiencing a bicultural identity revolves around our cultural values, and how we balance cultural values both at home and in our South Asian specific cultures. And then we have the Americanized culture that we're a part of, and how we balance the two. If we find ourselves being more of one at home and maybe one more outside as we kind of are in class or at work or whatever the case may be, and the difficulties and perhaps trying to balance and be both and be our full selves and experience our full selves in all of these various different settings and environments can be very difficult. But briefly, just wanted to highlight some of these things in a more broader or general sense, culture, values, and just customs. And when it comes to culture, broadly defining, this is all of a group's guiding values, outward signs, and symbols that we as a whole identify with and represent us together. As far as cultural values, this is often pieced together by just observing various customs that we've passed down through generations. So again, the importance of family comes up as we pass down our traditions, pass down our values, what's important to us, what makes us who we are. And then the customs is how we practice those values. And that could be experienced through religion, just how we approach our family, prayer, whatever the case may be. These customs that reflect our culture and reflect our cultural values, just the outward sign of us and the group that represents us. And, our culture can be a part of us in many different ways. And we can also express our culture in many different ways. Our culture and cultural values can come out in our food, our religion, our family, and the way that acculturation or assimilation could impact these negatively. Our cultural expression could be, having struggles and finding, ingredients for specific cultural foods, not having grocery stores that carry any of these items. Struggling to find places of worship. RuPaul mentioned going to Catholic school and being one of the only non-Christians who are there. So often if we live in a community that doesn't reflect cultural diversity or isn't as accepting of, various different cultures, that could put a lot of pressure on us as, where do we go to worship, as religion is often such a big piece of what makes us who we are. Or when it comes to work or school and not being able to celebrate cultural holidays fully because they aren't recognized on a widespread level in the US. And, this could bring up a lot of stress for ourselves because we may not feel like we have the power to advocate for taking that time off because these days are representative to us. And, explaining that to someone who doesn't understand can be really daunting and can be really stressful. So, as, Americanization kind of happens, this again can create pressure on parents, on kids, and peers, and kind of impact how we fit into a more American ideal. So just different ways that we could briefly kind of cope with this is, finding our community, finding others who maybe align with our culture or cultural values, perhaps reaching out to other people who have had the same path, whether that's first generation or being an immigrant and having our family come here for the first time. I'm talking to people who have lived perhaps in the US longer, and getting an insight on their experiences and how they've kind of navigated feelings of loneliness, or things that they've done to kind of ease the acculturation process. Doing research on trying to find grocery stores that kind of sell ingredients, or, however we can cultivate this supportive network around us to be able to preserve our cultural values and better kind of navigate the acculturation process. So as we continue to kind of reflect and have a bit of open discussion, another cultural value activity that I think is often very helpful, or could be helpful, is just to explore how we define our cultural values. So whether, you do this in your head or write it down or perhaps type it out, thinking of an image or perhaps drawing an image of yourself. And after cultivating or drawing this, picture of yourself, surrounding that image with the things that you identify with and the things that identify you towards your culture. And you may want to put things near the body that are symbolically related to your heart, for descriptions of your belief systems or traditions that are important to you and your family. Near your mouth to perhaps describe the languages that you speak or the heritage that gets passed down between you and your family. And near the legs and arms, perhaps to describe what you do for fun, just activities or traditions or customs that you do and how it ties into your culture. So we could perhaps give a couple of minutes. I know keeping track of time, we may not fully be able to go into this, but this is, I think, just a good reflective activity, even if we don't have the same time to discuss it. We'll just give a couple minutes as you kind of think about this, perhaps draw it out or think about it. We may have time for perhaps one person to share. So just take a couple minutes to kind of think about how you define your cultural values and how that relates to you.
And I'll put into the chat the so in the drawing, near the heart, near the mouth, near the legs, what might be the prompts for each of those, just in case people want to continue doing this as we talk. This is also a good activity for you to do with, your children, your parents, to kind of do together as kind of a family activity to really kind of have, this discussion that we're having today, but, within the community and outside of here to kind of continue that reflection.
So we'll give about one more minute before we ask if anyone would like to share any of their reflections as they, did this activity.
The Sakranti, yeah, in January. Oh, that's awesome. Subha shared in the chat the harvest festival that happens. It's called Sakranti.
So what, as anyone who's done this activity or maybe still finishing, is there anything else that anyone would like to share about ideas or different things that kind of came up for them as they explored how they define their culture?
So Tim, I think this is universal to all cultures, food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hands down the winner.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Anyone else? I'll say for myself, I have my cup of chai right here, and that is always something that I'm drinking and making for other people, and just, spreading love through chai.
I would add dress. Here, when I came here, occasionally I would wear a sari. There was one instance where at that time I was taking evening courses at Columbia University. I had an evening class. I was coming back after the evening class. It must be 8:30 or closer to 9 o'clock. And of course, I was waiting for the subway, and a person who was obviously drunk, and he latched on to me, so to say, because it was a very significant identifier, so to say.
Yeah.
I would try to move away from him to go to another part of the platform, but he will follow. And I was really terrified. And then I got into the train. Then luckily it was crowded enough so I could hide. And I got home that way.
Wow.
Yeah, so from then on, I started wearing pants and tops whenever I go out by myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's such a, I'm sure, kind of experience that a lot of people have had, and is sad because I think it, thank you for sharing it, and it breaks my heart that you had to. I think a lot of times society kind of creates erasure of these things that are symbols and culture, or pieces of ourself that are so important to us, and we have to hide them or kind of conceal them and do them in private, or in our home, and then have a different outside version. And it's like a loss, which is important to talk about and grieve in a way. Okay, so we will...
So, as we continue to talk about how the various different ways of bicultural identity can impact our cultural values and cultural expression, I want to talk a bit about just friends, dating, and identity. And this I think this is important for all of us, just as we are, social individuals, and these things just often come up. That we'd have a potential struggle to make friends due to cultural differences, especially if they are not as understanding or as open to, receiving who we are within our culture and how we express that. In terms of dating, this can often be really isolating if we're not finding romantic partners who either share our same cultural identity or bicultural identity, or also not as open to receiving who we are and also exploring what our culture means to us. And this could, again, bring up a lot of stress or a lot of anxiety, as if we have these more negative experiences, it may make us less inclined to want to explore friendships or romantic opportunities with other people, due to fear of perhaps judgment or criticism or receiving perhaps any stereotypical remarks back. So it can be really very impactful, especially for those who are first gen and have the importance of shared cultural values between them or their family, or even a group identity. It can be very difficult to balance this importance, especially with friends or romantic partners who may not fully understand. And this can carry, like Tanya's metaphor earlier of having 2 feet and trying to paddle in different areas. So these feelings of not fully belonging into either group, can be a real potential result of biculturalism and can create instances of loneliness or of social anxiety, and can foster this deeper need to find social connection. And we do have the emergence of social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, other social media apps that do allow us to connect socially to others who share our cultural identity. But also understanding the limitations of that, it may not fully suffice for our personal lives, outside of technology. So kind of leaning on how we can build a social network with other people who are supportive, who are understanding, and can be there for us. And, it may take some vulnerability, but it also really is important. And, to be able to start with people who we can trust and who we know are supportive. So this can be, maybe a coworker who we can talk to, or friends, family, for our children, perhaps asking them questions about who they feel most comfortable with sitting with at lunch or on the bus, or who they feel comfortable with talking to and exploring, and really leaning into being themselves in a full manner. And then in terms of just identity, and again, it's important to kind of recognize that what we bring to our own socialization and social values, and instances that we do have a unique gift of being so flexible and socially adaptive because of our bicultural identity, and being able to adapt enough to use what we individually have and who we individually are, and bringing that forth to the table to kind of tailor our approach to finding friends or finding romantic partners, around our senses of culture, ethnicity, race, or whatever that may be, to really allow us to be adaptable and responsive to what we need. And lastly, just in terms of gender identity and expression, just with the history of perhaps strong patriarchal culture that have strict male and female gender roles that kind of come with that. There are gender non-conforming identities that exist within our culture, and individuals who may feel like they don't fully align with a more male or feminine or female presentation or identity. And these gender identities, they exist, but they're understanding there's a really high stigma in culture that may make it hard to express these, or fully be yourselves, or fully be supportive to loved ones who may be feeling like this. And due to that stigma and perhaps fear of being fully open about being perhaps a non-heterosexual orientation or gender non-conforming identity, it may make us or loved ones not feel as comfortable or safe to tell anyone. So as important as it is for us to find our social networks and find those who are supportive of us, it's also important for us to be that same support for others, and try to be open and available and accepting for others, even from within and without, from within or outside of our cultural values. We may also find this kind of enhancing our sense of connection with other people.
I feel like there is a course for parenting 101 that somebody taught me before when my kids were born, because a lot of times in hindsight, obviously we feel, did we cause anything that caused my son to develop mental health issues, for example. I know they say it's all chemical imbalance in the brain that causes mental health, but there is always a guilt that I could have been a better father. I could have done things differently, but nobody taught me how to be a good parent. It's all learning on the job.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And as much as many difficulties as that brings, also it's important as we continue to navigate and learn and grow, it's also important to be kind to ourselves and realize that we are doing the best that we can with what we have and with what we know. And, as we continue to learn and grow, just in the overall experience of life, knowing that, we'll continue to strive to do better. And, again, just kind of really leaning into that self-compassion. But no, I really do appreciate you sharing. It sounds like, and that's been really difficult. As we continue to talk about this and just explore things that we kind of touched on earlier, is racism and discrimination. And really, especially within these last few years, as the Trump administration and the coronavirus pandemic, there's just been a huge increase and exacerbation of xenophobia, bigotry, racism, discrimination towards the Asian American and South Asian and Pacific Islander communities, and just the toll that can take experiencing racism and discrimination on an individual level, on a family level, on a systemic level, and especially as that just increases and increases in its rates. That can add such an increase to feelings of stress, to anxiety, feelings of, isolation, perhaps depression. This can impair how we sleep. If these things and thoughts keep us up at night, it can impair how we interact out in the world. If, we have to worry about our safety, if something or someone is going to attack us or say something to us that is really racist and hurtful. If we're at work or at class and have to think about, is someone going to say something or do something to me that is just reflective of the racist society in which we live, that can really, really impact us in a negative level. We have things that so often come up as just in regular life, aside from the pandemic and just the Trump administration adding so much more racist rhetoric, feelings of, the perpetual foreigner, or the model minorities, these stereotypes, and how they by themselves impact our daily lives. With the perpetual foreigner, the feelings of never fully fitting in, or people, asking, oh, where are you from? But no, where are you really from? When, the case of I'm from New Jersey, or I'm from New York. No, but where are you really from? Things like that, not really feeling like you fully fit in or perhaps belong. And then the model minority stereotype can add so much stress and anxiety on performance, academic performance, work performance. It can feel isolating, feeling like you have to be good at technology or at math or science, or, all of these things that are put onto, our culture community, that is just a given, that can feel really isolating for us, or feel depressing if we perhaps don't feel like we meet up to this model minority standard. It is really isolating. It doesn't allow you to fully be yourself for what talents that you might have, but yeah, on an individual level, just so these really can impact lives on a day-to-day basis. And, even within that, as we see pushes to being more culturally acceptable or to end racism, Dr. Sherry Wang, who's a professor of counseling and psychology at Santa Clara, she says, that it can also create the perception that Asian Americans are not considered to be people of color and perhaps maybe immune to racism, especially in line with this model minority, stereotype. So being fully seen in that regard is also something that's, just very important. just want to highlight that, especially over the past year, attacks on Asian Americans have increased upwards of 150% over the previous year. But just continue to fit a long history of, viewing South Asians, Asian Americans in a particular way that make discrimination and violence against them more likely. And even the instances that aren't fully criminal, America itself just has a long history of being racist, and these things can impact, employment opportunities, can impact dating, can impact how we connect socially with others, and impact academic and just job performance. So really just wanted to touch and highlight on just how impactful racism and discrimination can be, and even as parents can feel really isolating, or perhaps feel like you're in a stuck point when it comes to, how do I talk about this with my child? How do I prepare my kids to perhaps experience some of these things? I want them to be informed of things that may happen to them, or heaven forbid, instances in which they do experience racism or discrimination, and they come home and having to have this conversation, and just experiencing the sadness and hurt that they have, on top of what we may be feeling ourselves, can just add to a lot of these feelings that we may be experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And just before we kind of get into, kind of self-care tips, I'm wondering if anyone has any reflections or thoughts on, what we've covered so far, or anything about just experiencing any racism or discrimination and how that may impact them.
I still remember when I came, this was 1997, I was going to New York and somebody was calling me, "Hey, Coolie, how are you doing?" I can never forget that. It was a black man calling me Coolie. Maybe he was jealous that so many Indians are coming here. I don't know what animosity he had against me. And somebody in Jersey City shouting at me, "Go back to Bombay." He assumed I was from Bombay. It happens even now. Like, I work in Wall Street, predominantly white people on the management. They casually say, "Let's hire a few more coolies." Like, the guy thought he was joking. And they think Asians do the low-level job. So for them, in their mind, Asians do the technical work, just give them the job, and they belong to the management side. It happens even now. It's very subtle. It feels like I have to tell my kids, just develop thick skin, otherwise you cannot survive. That's not how you're supposed to be saying, but unfortunately that's
the reality.
That's the way it is. Again, majority people are good from all race, but there are still some minority out there who behave this way, and that impacts.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it holds such a huge level of being unfair. Like you said, you shouldn't have to, have that conversation with your kids about needing to develop thick skin in order to survive. And I think that's another great example of just how it impacts our day-to-day lives, especially with something like a job that we have to go into every day. And I can only imagine the stress and anxiety and feelings that might come up with having to go into an office every day where you're concerned about, covert or overt microaggressions, or just straight up racist remarks, and just how that impacts you on a personal level, an internal level, and then just impacts your ability to really do your job. So yeah, no, I really do appreciate you sharing, and it really is just a really unfair part of this country and just, across the world that comes with it, unfortunately. And just myself wish there was so many more things that we could do to be able to really address these issues and talk about these issues and try to just correct so many wrong things that are out there.
Yeah, I think, look, it seems like I have to accept, I decided, I chose to come to this country. So I should not be complaining that these are all happening. If I have to suffer or face these things, people might say it's my choice. Either you want to live here or you go wherever you feel like you belong. But I don't know, it's unfortunate. Nobody should feel that, should feel that way, irrespective of which part of the world you live in. But that seemed to be the reality.
Exactly. And, then even with that statement, we all choose to live somewhere, but we never choose, or we never sign up to experience racism. We never choose to experience discrimination. We never choose to experience hatred or violence or any of that. And those two things don't have to be connected. So even with people saying statements like that, oh, you chose to be here, so this kind of comes with it, is again reflective of just the unfortunate racist society in which we do live. Because where you choose to live should have no reflection or impact in how you're treated. We may choose to live somewhere, but we never choose to experience those kind of things from other people.
And in my experience, most of the people that say these things, they're also migrants at one point. They forget to whom this land belongs to originally. I had an experience like that in Joanne Fabric. So I asked the person, hey, let's go back and look at where we both came from. This land doesn't belong to you or me. She doesn't know how to answer. So sometimes they forget. So maybe we need to remind. We all came in different ways to this land.
Yeah.
Some by boat, some by flight.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and you touch on another really great point, is that there's internalized racism. There's internalized discrimination that even for people who share the same cultural values or ethnicity or race as us, that there often is internalized racism where they can kind of perpetuate the same things that are so hurtful to us. And perhaps as a means to fit in or to feel like they belong or to try to deflect, but whatever the case may be, knowing that it's all hurtful, whether that comes from someone who looks like us or from someone who doesn't. And perhaps even more hurtful from someone who looks like us, because we're perhaps anticipating and expecting more compassion, more understanding from shared experiences, and to not receive that can be all the more hurtful. So yeah, you bring up a really great point of how racism is not just one race to another, but discrimination can be even within our own culture.
Yes, my family got discriminated because my son has developmental disabilities and autism. So within our own culture, I didn't get support when I needed, but I got support from all the other friends that I have around me. So it all depends, right? It depends on where you are, how the circle is around you. So that's where it all depends on who is there next to you at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly, I have a great group of friends from all different cultures and paths. So I'm really, really lucky in that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so I'm gonna move us to the next slide.
And we've, talked about so many great things when it comes to facing discrimination and racism, and just, being mindful of the time. We do talk about just mental health impacts in general, as well as some unconditional positive regard and self-compassion. So I'm going to move a little quickly through this, but just to highlight some really key points of self-care for facing discrimination, is to try to reach out to friends, family members, people in our support circle, who can validate what we're feeling, who can validate what our experiences are, and being able to reflect on those, process those together, building and fostering a sense of community with trusted individuals can be so important as we can, as we can share the burden of these experiences and create a safe space for us and others where we can really come together and talk about these things. And even just talking about them, acknowledging them, saying them out loud, sharing those experiences can really feel relieving. It can, as we share the burden across multiple people instead of just carrying it on ourselves for so long. It's a really great burden to carry just with one person. As much as we can, take breaks from the news, taking breaks from social media. There's so many horror stories that are put out on social media and are put out on the news, and seeing that in such a perpetual looped cycle can really impact our day-to-day lives, our self-esteem, our feelings, and emotions, and how we operate each day. That sometimes just kind of taking a break and stepping away from that as much as we can, again, not wanting to, is trying to remain as informed as we can, but also knowing what our limits and boundaries are, and trying to take as many breaks from social media and from the news as we can. And then again, if you're ever discriminated against, putting your safety first. Safety should be your first concern. And, sometimes the best self-defense, if at all possible, can be to ignore or walk away from provocation, getting to a safe space, getting around a crowd where we feel more safe. But we're just trying to protect and preserve our safety. And then from there, trying to seek immediate comfort, emotional support, physical support from anyone as quickly as possible. And then lastly, just, reminding yourself that this is a part of a larger story, and keeping a wider lens on just the current wave of xenophobia, racism, discrimination that South Asians and Asian Americans are dealing with, and knowing that these microaggressions and macroaggressions feel and sometimes are painfully personal, but just reflect a larger legacy of oppression against Asians and South Asians in the US, and recognizing that, this is bigger than you and isn't meant to minimize your current experiences, as they're still very valid, but, looking at the history really helps kind of put into perspective the greater complexity in which we are operating in. It kind of helps us assess what we can and can't control, and how we go from there to find the support, validation, care, and concern that we need.
So really quick, I'm gonna just loop all of these things a little bit back to mental health. So, we talked about cultural values, we talked about assimilation, separation, marginal, like all the different ways of acculturation, friendships and dating and identity, as well as racism. And so all of these things, if you kind of look at it like the building block, the foundation at the bottom, is, your mental health, your well-being, and your kind of personal sense of who you are. And all of these things kind of have this additive impact that, rests heavy on that foundation. So clearly we can see from so many of the topics Tim just pointed out that this has an impact on mental health in ways that we might not even be aware of and are outside of our consciousness. I think, I think Gopi and when you shared, like, you're kind of starting to realize this is connecting the dots for you. And so I just wanted to throw out some statistics to know how common this is. So 1 in 5 South Asians in the US experience anxiety and mood disorders. South Asians also often have the psychological distress as more physical symptoms. So chronic pain can often actually be more of a manifestation of mental health issues. And a lot of elderly South Asians actually are at higher risk and experience higher rates of depression, while younger South Asian youth are at great risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And these are definitely things that we need to kind of keep aware of in the community and raise sort of awareness for, and to reduce stigma around. So in terms of some of the challenges in the community that exacerbate these mental health challenges, or is a lot, kind of connected to that stigma. So shame and embarrassment, what will people say or think, log kya kahenge, and the guilt that often leads to more secrecy and silence around these topics. So people might not want to think about how their identity might have an impact on their mental health, more out of even just an avoidance of wanting to think about these things, because it's not something that's, that's not part of the culture. We don't really talk about these things. And that's sometimes a challenge. And then there's also very real concerns, right? Of like, how will this impact my future prospects? Either that is in school, in your career, job, and, marriage and relationships. Like, I think there was some discourse in the chat around kind of South Asians marrying outside of the community, and how that is something that can be, very much challenging within certain families. And so yeah, that definitely can have an impact on mental health as well as then just kind of the fear of misunderstanding in both in as well as outside the community. So if you're going to, see a therapist or a doctor for the first time, maybe not knowing what's going on, and then face stigma or discrimination as well from someone who might not be that aware about South Asian culture and communities, and might not be able to necessarily kind of meet your needs the way you might want them to. I also, while thinking of challenges, also always like to think about strength and growth while thinking about building a strong sense of identity and purpose. And so there are also a lot of growing opportunities. I think the South Asian community, and even just being able to be here today for me and to see this kind of community here, there's a lot of resource and resilience. And I think that's something that we need to remember and center as we kind of move forward and think of these topics to, when things get difficult, to remember that that's something that is such a strength that is already part of this community, that sort of emphasis on family and values. There's also such, this is maybe a little bit of a stereotype, but, a strong foothold in health sciences and increasing research and representation of South Asians in mental health fields, which is incredible and, hopefully continues to grow. And so there's definitely a lot of room for opportunity and growth that I think is important to reflect on.
Yeah, unfortunately, the stigma plays a big role in. I feel like unless somebody from his or her family, somebody is very familiar with mental health issues, they don't understand. That doesn't mean I'm angry or upset with my friends. And some of my friends casually ask me, it has been more than a year, you still don't know what the diagnosis is for your son. It really hurts me. I don't know how to answer that. Mental health is not like your leg is broken or you are diagnosed with diabetes with a blood test. Even if I wish I would know the exact assessment and diagnosis. Mental health doesn't work that way. But even if they don't understand it, they ask questions like that, and I don't know how to respond.
Mhm.
And it makes me feel like maybe I failed. I mean, maybe I'm not doing enough for my son. And I'm not able to face these friends anymore. I don't go to any of these functions. I don't return their calls, because if they ask me, how is your son? I don't want to give an update
Mm.
to the people who cannot relate to things.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to, the sort of discrimination that can be within the internalized, kind of what Tim was saying before. Within
Yeah,
the
I mean, I'm not angry with them. I'm not upset. They cannot help me. I wish somebody has a magic wand. Nobody has a magic wand.
yeah.
I cannot change them either. Maybe I would have behaved the same way if I haven't had the experience firsthand with mental health related challenges. Unless you are forced to, you don't have to educate on these topics.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. Definitely.
Can I jump in and respond really quickly to that? So one thing that you said that you feel like I don't remember exactly what you said, but something to the effect of that you feel like you're not doing things right for your son or whatever. And I just, as like, I'm a mom who I've dealt with mental health issues my entire life, like my entire adulthood, I should say. And now my kids are teenagers and they're struggling with their own things. And I got to tell you, like, the fact that you're acknowledging and supporting your child, I feel like that is everything. I mean, I know you want there to be a resolution and to understand what's happening and to get him better, of course, but the number of people that I have talked to, especially in the South Asian community, who are like, oh, my kid's fine. What do they have to have anxiety over? They have a great life. Or, oh, we don't talk to therapists or whatever. I mean, people who are worried or afraid to get help for their kids. But the fact that you are, I think that is so huge. And I think that you really, like, I applaud you for that, because it's not easy, especially when you haven't had that background of having dealt with mental health issues before. But the fact that you're willing to do whatever you need to do to help your son, you should be proud of that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I myself suffered from depression in the past, and I used to go to a doctor, internal medicine, who was from India, and I didn't even know I could go to somebody like therapist, and she immediately referred me. She didn't even want to listen to me. She referred me to a psychiatrist, and she was also from India. I'm not against doctors from India, but it's not the doctor is from India or which part of the world. It is very individualistic, right? Every doctor approaches things differently. But this doctor prescribed me medication. Medication didn't help, so I inherently developed a bias that medications are not good for mental health from my own bad experience. And I struggled a lot to come out of that depression, because I didn't know there are many other ways. In hindsight, all I would have wanted was talk therapy, to talk to somebody with my struggles. So mental health very, very, very complex, and there's no black and white answer. Even so, that's a reason. Like when my wife said, for example, my son may have ADHD when he was in high school, I kind of brushed off. It might be just a teenage thing. Don't worry. And now I regret. Maybe I should listen to my wife. So personal experience, some people have, they have that common sense and awareness. They proactively catch the kids when they're young, when they see the young children struggle with things. But I don't know. I guess what I feel like no matter how much I do, my son is still not out of he's trying to climb out of the hole, but he's not out yet. But no matter how much I do, I feel like I'm not doing enough. But
I
that's a
wonder,
struggle, I guess, as a parent.
We definitely want to assure you that even just showing up today and sharing with us, you're doing so much, and more than a lot of than more than I think is kind of baked into the culture, and to that based on the amount of stigma that we have, you're definitely kind of really being very aware, being attuned to him and to what he needs, and trying your best. I think we didn't grow up with these topics, and so like this presentation, a lot of these sort of ideas are in a way new, or maybe just kind of things that we didn't consider or didn't reflect on. And to be able to now come here and do that so openly is already 100, like, just, I always say showing up and doing the work is like 90% of it. And then the rest is the impact of that, of you just showing up. And so by showing up here, you're doing so much already.
Like my son is 21, like you Tanya and Tim, you look like my son's age. I wish, I'm thinking back of my head, I wish my son grew up and become mature like both of you. But I'm sure he will get there. I have hope.
It's part of his own journey. So
Yeah.
you cannot like compare, like, okay, that person is going ahead. There may be some people who are like much worse than your son. So it takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, we'll kind of go through some of the skill building and actually kind of touch upon some of what, just came up in terms of parent-child communication. So take it away, Tim.
So when it comes to parent-child communication, really just there's so much importance of kind of how the things that we've talked about so far, like, listening, curiosity, belief, patience, support, and just information. And I think everyone's kind of touched on this in their own ways so very well. And especially kind of looking through the chat, I think this has been something that a lot of us are really trying to practice in our lives already. Really engaging in active listening, trying to hear what it is our child or even loved one, if it's not our child, is experiencing. And trying to listen for what their near and dear feelings are related to these experiences, and trying our best to put ourselves where they're at, and see where they're coming from and what it is that they're going through. Approaching it with curiosity, and not with judgment, but really trying to remain as open as possible, hearing them out, asking questions, clarifying questions. Could you tell me more about, how this is meant for you? Can you tell me more about, how this makes you feel when you experience these things, or that you've experienced this, or, I can only imagine just how difficult this must be for you. I'd love to hear more, just about how you've kind of navigated this. Really trying to be there for them and explore and understand from their point of view what this is like. And then believing in your child and in yourself, child or loved one, to model trust. I can only imagine what you're going through. I'm really sorry that this is something that you've been experiencing. I can see how this has played, such a huge part of your life, or I can see how this has been so impactful for you in your life. Really kind of leaning into that. I hear what you're saying. I can believe what it is that you're experiencing and believe how real it is for you. Because at the end of the day, we're really trying to be there for them, and I'm trying to understand their experiences, and their experiences may be different than us, or it may impact them in a way that may not impact us, but really leaning into the model of trust, and that we believe them, and believe their experiences really goes such a long way, especially with these bottom three, especially support, the listening, curiosity, and belief, which is really what we're trying to provide more than anything else, is to provide the support, to provide the level of care, the compassion, so that they know that we're here for them, that we love them, and we'll be there for them through whatever it is that they're experiencing. And then hopefully that they can continue to express to us what it is that they're feeling, how it is that it makes them feel, and how we can, patiently be there and be able to help them receive any kind of care or support or whatever it else may be, whatever it is that they're needing from us in those moments. And then also just kind of informing ourselves, helping them find access to more information is often such a huge demonstration of the belief and support and the curiosity, is trying to help them find more information or help them find what it is that they need to kind of navigate, this difficult situation they may find themselves in. And just lastly, briefly, with unconditional positive regard, just really what we want to get from this is just an attitude of acceptance, an attitude of love for ourselves and for others. Kind of acknowledging what it is that we're experiencing, acknowledging what it is that others may be experiencing, and that regardless of what we may be going through, regardless of what we may be feeling or thinking, that we see ourselves and others as inherently human and lovable, regardless of what they may be experiencing. It doesn't mean that we perhaps accept each and every single action, each and every single thought or experience, but we're really trying to get beyond that to a much deeper level of connection with what's going on. And really trying to lean on being there, being loving, being supportive, and giving ourselves and giving other people the grace that it is that we want and need.
So these are just some quick ways that you can kind of practice unconditional positive regard. We're kind of recognizing that we're over time. So either we can kind of go through quickly or just skip some stuff, whatever. Is it okay if we go a little bit over time? Yeah, I'm seeing a thumbs up from Suba. Okay, well, Tim, if you were going to continue.
So just a few different ways in which we can kind of model unconditional positive regard, or how we can incorporate it and practice it in our own lives, is to, modify our words. So any criticisms, any judgment that we kind of talked about earlier, and instead kind of replace them with assurances that our behaviors, our thoughts, feelings, actions, hasn't changed our feelings about ourselves, hasn't changed our feelings about the other person. And, instead of, one thing that we like to do is use ands as opposed to buts. Buts kind of take away everything that was said before for what's said after. But and kind of highlights the importance of both things. Maybe I don't fully understand what it is that you're going through, and at the same time, I'm doing my best to be here for you and supportive in what it is that you're feeling. So really trying to highlight the full experience and the full range of emotions that may come up with that. And then focusing on feelings, being curious about what you're feeling, being curious about what others are feeling, and just the inner experiences that come with that. And really trying to tap into connecting on a much more deeper level. Instead of going and staying at the surface, really connecting to the deeper, more personal experiences. And lastly, just reflecting on perspective. We may love this person, love our children, friends, etc. Although we may not approve, agree with, understand all of the feelings, experiences that they may have. But again, we love them unconditionally. We are leaning into the more human experience that we all share. And although we may not understand, we want to do our best to be present and be supportive.
Okay, so our last skill is kind of talking about emotions. So really quickly, I'm just going to copy this emotion thermometer and put it into the chat. Essentially, what this is kind of related to a lot of what we've been talking about, but kind of talking about emotions. And so this can be very difficult and new to a lot of us. but is so, so important in order for us to be more attuned with ourselves as well as others. And it can lead to better communication, improved relationships, as well as greater awareness of oneself. And I think it's so important in kind of considering these topics of identity, of how we're feeling as we kind of think about the different aspects of ourself. So I looked it in the chat, but essentially this emotion thermometer can be really helpful as a prompt in the moment to help you identify your emotions. So you want to stop what you're doing, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, how am I feeling? What is this emotion? What is coming up for me right now? And you can kind of look through these pictures to identify the emotion if you need, and then take it a step further and ask yourself on a scale of 0 to 10, how intensely am I feeling the emotion that you've identified? And so with children, this can be really great to kind of have a picture and share it with them and have them really learn how to label their emotions. And even just becoming more aware of negative feelings can help you diffuse them and manage your emotions more effectively. And that brings us right to the end to our closing meditation, which is somewhat related. So we'd actually want everyone to kind of do this if you feel comfortable and able to do it. But we're going to do a self-compassion mantra to close. And, something that I just always like to acknowledge in doing it with, particularly with bicultural identity groups, is that in a lot of more collectivist and non-individualistic cultures, there's such an emphasis on others and family and giving, right? And so it's always, while that's so, so important, it's also really important to recognize that it's impossible to care for others and to give unless you extend that compassion to yourself and to your own identity. It's always like that kind of image of, in an airplane, you want to put the mask on yourself before you put it onto someone else. So that's what we're going to do just to close up. So if everyone can just take a deep breath, you can close your eyes, whatever feels comfortable. Just inhale deeply. Exhale, push the air out of your body. Take a minute to acknowledge the emotion that you're feeling right now in this present moment. Just reflect on what that emotion is. Give it a label if you feel like you can. Be warm, kind, and non-judgmental to yourself as you sit with that emotion. Remind yourself that whatever that feeling is, it's a genuine human emotion and is what connects you with your community, with the people in this group, and with the larger human family. You exist and therefore you feel, and you feel because you're human. Take a deep breath in. And a deep breath out. And another breath in. And another one out. Okay, and whenever you're ready, you can come back. And, if you feel like you can share whatever emotion it was, you can share it with us, put it in the chat. But I just like to share that my emotion is gratitude.
I feel overwhelmed. There is so much to the emotional scale or emotional paradigm and communication. So many things go into it. How I behave and how I observe others and support them and be compassionate, etc., etc. So that's my feeling. I would like to have a copy of the recording so that I can reflect more.
I know.
On our website, Rukmini.
I know we threw a lot of things at all of you, and so we were just eager to kind of share as much as we can, but we appreciate your patience and attendance today.